This is We the People News, not attorney, not giving legal advice. Educational purposes only. Okay? Now, anything I say or do is just opinion. No more, no less. Okay? Hearsay, do your own research. Arm yourself with knowledge. Use that Second Amendment. Never look straight forward, always look around and be able to protect yourself by any means necessary. Let's go.
Restitution is paid to the tea company. This is, again, collective punishment. It is not treating people as individuals. He said a property of the value of many millions of money was sacrificed to revenge, not repay the loss of a few thousands. This is administering justice with a heavy hand indeed. This was collective punishment, something we see a lot of that over and over and over. Now, he said these are acts of power assumed by a body of men foreign to our constitutions. This is that question of who are these people? Why do they have a right to have any say over what we do? We don't know them. We've never interacted with them. We don't choose them. We have no influence upon them.
And right there, right? The administrative is foreign to the Constitution.
These are just far off tyrants. These are the acts of power assumed by a body of men foreign to our constitutions and unacknowledged by our laws, against which we do, on behalf of the inhabitants of British America, enter this our solemn and determined protest. And we do earnestly entreat His Majesty, as yet the only mediatory power between the several states of the British Empire, to recommend to his Parliament of Great Britain, what's that? A total revocation of these acts, which, however nugatory they may be, may yet prove the cause of further discontents and jealousy among us. So he made this demand. Basically, we are going to say, you can't do any of this. You got to get rid of it. He didn't ask for things to be less bad or more efficient or lighter regulation or more equality. That's just tinkering around the edges. He wanted a total repeal, and that was the only thing that was seen as acceptable. Now, James Madison later referred to this kind of position. He didn't cite Jefferson specifically in his report of 1800 as part of the fundamental principle on which independence itself was declared. That is, the British had a limit to their power. When they go beyond that power, those acts are void, and it's up to the people to take a stand for their rights, no matter what the other governments happen to say about it. And here's how Madison put it. The assertion by Great Britain of a power to make laws for the other members of the empire in all cases whatsoever ended in the discovery that she had a right to make laws for them in no cases whatsoever. I covered that in much more detail in another episode just last month, The Ignored.
Repeat that, right? And listen closely.
Fundamental principle of the American Revolution. Alan will get that included in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. We got a bit more here. Here's from Harry. We got to go to the king. He said, while Parliament's unconstitutional, null and void acts drew the lion's share of Jefferson's ire. A lot of people, when you read about this, they'll talk about how they focused on the king most, but he didn't get to the king till really, he started with it, but he went through this laundry list of acts of Parliament, and then he finally gets to the king again. He said he also took on the king's deviations from the line of duty. And Mike says that Jefferson saw the king going...
Okay, and when he says Parliament, you're talking about basically what we call today Congress and the Senate first.
Outside long-standing tradition and custom in his wanton exercise of power, and even where maybe the king had the right to do stuff, he was going against a long type of tradition and doing things that no one really expected or wanted, no one approved of, that had lived in much different ways for a long time. And Mike says that Jefferson enumerated several actions by the crown that were seriously problematic. Of course, dissolving colonial legislatures and refusing to call them into session. 2, making civil government subject to the military. 3, sending large bodies of armed forces to the colonies, standing armies issues, of course. Asserting what Jefferson called the fictitious principle that all lands belong originally to the king. Property rights here. The British were claiming the power to use American lands to cover debts for people that didn't take on the debt. So they were basically saying, well, those are the king's lands, and you're just going to have to pay extra for this if you want to stay there. And then also,
And what is your county saying about property tax? Well, I mean, if you own it, then you don't have to pay property tax. But if you got to pay property tax, then they're saying it's their jurisdiction, their property. They're drawing a line in there. Now, it's not cookie cut like this directly, but the principle still applies. What are we doing today? We are using word salad. Exact same thing that they talked about against the king is used today, but in word salad.
refusing to allow counties in Virginia specifically to split without meeting certain requirements. And so he had a kind of a pretty long list of stuff there. But he also had an issue with slavery as well. And he writes, the abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies, where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. But, he said, we need to do something. We're trying to get rid of it, and you're blocking us from actually making that happen. He said, previous to the enfranchisement of the slaves we have, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa. Yet our repeated attempts to effect this by prohibitions and by imposing duties which might amount to a prohibition have been hitherto defeated by His Majesty's negative. Man, there's a lot there. First of all, I want to point out, I was just thinking this as I'm reading through it again. Duties amount to a prohibition. If you tax stuff enough, if you make it really expensive, it's no different than saying you're not allowed to buy or sell this stuff in practice, because that's how it plays out, because it's too expensive. But he's also pointing out that,
And what property tax is now, they just keep going up and up and up. Makes sense?
The first step we're trying to make, because our ultimate goal is to get rid of slavery, is to stop the international slave trade. Of course, George Mason found the fact that they were going to let the international slave trade continue until 1808 to be kind of the turning point at the Philadelphia Convention, the deal that allowed that where he said, oh no, I am definitely not on board with what you guys are proposing here. Thomas Jefferson was long against this as well, and he was the guy, the first day he had a chance, in 1808, he was the guy who signed the ban on the international slave trade while he was president in office. So this is something he worked for many years, despite whatever was going on in his personal life, but he certainly pushed for it and then made it happen. So, but he said, look, we were trying to make this happen before 1774, and the king used his royal negative, his veto power, to say we're not allowed to do that. And this is how Jefferson described it. That this is so shameful an abuse of power trusted with His Majesty for other purposes, as if not reformed, would call for some legal restrictions. So Jefferson on slavery there as well. And Mike Maharrey points out that he concluded his list of grievances against the crown with an emphatic smackdown of royal authority, boldly asserting that the colonists were laying their grievances before His Majesty with that freedom of language and sentiment which becomes a free people claiming their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as the gift of their chief magistrate. He's telling them, look, we're going to you, we're asking you to do the right thing, but ultimately we claim our rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift from you or anybody else. So he goes on with this. Let those flatter who fear. Now, we're not going to kiss your butt on this, but, we'll be courteous, but ultimately the decision is ours. He said, let those flatter who fear. It is not an American art. To give praise which is not due might be well from the venal, but would ill beseem those who are asserting the rights of human nature. You can't assert your natural rights if you're begging for them. You aren't pleading for them. You assert your rights as coming from the laws of nature, from your creator, from your God, no matter what. Doesn't matter what government has to say. And that's how Jefferson is putting it. He said, they know and will therefore say that kings are the servants and not the proprietors of the people. So ultimately, he's reiterating the view that government is an agent of the people and nothing more, even kings. Now, although I have seen some historians who've written about this say that Jefferson really, underneath it all, he really believed that the colonies should have been declaring independence right there in 1774. Maybe that's the case. I'm not a Jeffersonian expert on this type of stuff. But he closed out this document saying, independence, breaking away is not our goal. And maybe that was just trying to smooth stuff over because he used some pretty harsh language here. But he said, it is neither our wish nor our interest to separate from her. We are willing on our part to sacrifice everything which reason can ask to the restoration of that tranquility for which all must wish. So he's like saying, look, these are the problems. Let's fix this. He even said, hey, king, this is my paraphrase, you have an opportunity to go down in history as the good guy, as someone who's seen as a hero, in essence, not someone who is ruining the prosperity of so many people. He said, on their part, let them be ready to establish union and a generous plan. Let them name their terms, but let them be just. Accept of every commercial preference. Again, he's talking about free trade. You gotta let go of all this regulation, this taxation, this control, these prohibitions. They all have to go, or else it's not a good thing. Except of every commercial preference, it is in our power to give for such things as we can raise for their use, or they make for ours. But let them not think to exclude us from going to other markets to dispose of those commodities which they cannot use, or to supply those wants which they cannot supply. In other words, if you can't buy our stuff, we're going to sell it to somebody else, whether you want to produce it in your country or not. If you can't use our stuff, we want to be able to conduct trade with other people. We want to be able to do that. We can give a preference to you because we can make deals, but you can't cut us off if we have more to give, more to sell. He said, still less let it be proposed that our properties within our own territories shall be taxed or regulated by any power on earth but our own. So the ultimate end goal for Jefferson is that the British had zero power in any way. No taxes, 0%, flat tax, that's the perfect one, and zero regulations, not tens of thousands of them like we have today. He said, the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy, but cannot disjoin them. This, sire, is our determined resolution. Look, I don't know about you, but I never heard a single word about this document when I went to government-run schools back in the 80s in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I didn't hear about it in college whatsoever. And I'm pretty confident they're not teaching really anybody about it today. If they do, maybe they mention it as a line, show a few highlights, but they're definitely not talking about calling acts of government a nullity, or the power of the people to declare them void, or limits of power or sovereignty. And that's why we work so hard every single day to get this kind of essential, historical, and foundational information and principles out to more and more people. And absolutely nothing helps us roll up our sleeves every single day and get the job done more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you support the work that we're doing, please consider joining us as a member today. You can join us for as little as $2 a month. You got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat. Please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have a bunch of other options, annual, 5-year, lifetime options. You can make a one-time donation at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Use all kinds of different payment methods, etc. But again, 10thamendmentcenter.com.
Alrighty, people. There you go. You can go to their channel and check them out. Me personally, I have not done it, but I did find this video interesting, and it did hit some points, and to understand when we broke off from Britain is because the exact same thing they're doing today, if not more. I mean, we've been taxed even worse than what they went through. And and even though they called out certain deals, the 1947 Administrative Act has really put us in a non constitutional area. They just kind of push the Constitution to the side and say, hey, you're an administrative. So there's no Constitution in my courts. And you've heard this over videos and videos and videos. But, you know, it's the same thing, but a different name. They used word salads, so they didn't see us going back in history and putting two and two together. As at the time when Jefferson used the words in his writing that actually changed the words of what their writings was even before then, due to the English change and all that kind of stuff. You know, 1,000 years, you wouldn't even understand English when it really came out. And today, you know, the British people and us, we can kind of communicate, but certain things still does not match up. Okay, we've actually put in too much slang in our words to be truly speaking the true English. On top of, the courts are putting way too much Latin in our courts and not using the English definition. We got to go through there and try to understand Latin, look up the definition to even operate in the courts sometimes. These are We the People News. Bye, y'all.